attention. It's Shane McGackran. Next.
Hi, this is Oliver Wakeman, and you're talking rock with Dave and Shane.
Hi, everybody. This is Rob Halford. Rudy Sargent.
Hi there, this is Steve Hackett.
You folks are just Rick Emmett of Triumph, and we're talking rock with Dave and Shane.
Oliver Wakeman, it's so great to have you with us, man. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you've been busy. You have the collections box set out, right? That's been out for a couple of weeks, I want to say.
Yeah, that's a pre-release out on April the 11th. It's Collaborations, the one with the guitarists that I've worked with. I've been quite lucky to work with some prog rock legends, shall we say? And it was nice to collate the work that I did with them into a box.
Yeah. What was and of course you have Dark Fables, which is one of your record that I think from last year as well. So you've been very, very, very busy. Talking about the box set, I mean, what was it like to put all that together and to obviously work with, all these incredible musicians? I mean, obviously Steve Howe, right? So many others.
It's a long convoluted story, and I'll try and give you the potted history version, which is that over the last few years, once we went into lockdown, or just prior to lockdown, I was working on the Yes box set, which was From a Stage, which is the music I'd written with Yes that had never been released because when I left the band, they went off and did the record with Trevor Horn, and so the music that I'd written with the band and collaborated with the band on, it never got used, and I was going to put it on a solo record, but then when I heard that Chris had passed away, Chris Squire, the fantastic bass player, I sort of put a bit of effort into going through the old discs that they'd sent me and taking out all the parts and realizing that there was some amazing music and performances there. And I started to put it together. And so we ended up turning that into a box set, which was a live album and these songs which had never been heard, which turned out to be sort of very, very popular. And the Yes fans really, really went for it. And then the management company said, "Oh, have you got anything else?" And that's when I ended up putting out the box set Tales by Gaslight, which was the work that I'd worked on with Clive Nolan, who is another keyboard player in the UK. And as part of that box set, we did an extra disc of unknown music, which was Dark Fables, that then got released separately. And then that led on again to the management company saying, "Well, that went rather well as well. Have you got anything else?" And it was like, "Well, yeah, I've got these records that I did with these guitarists, Steve Howe and Gordon Giltrap," which gets us to the point of your original question of working with somebody like Steve. But it sort of makes sense to that, because then what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump right back 20 years, because long before I joined Yes, I knew Steve Howe from, obviously, with Yes when Dad was in Yes when I was a little kid, and then with that, when they put the ABWH band together, when Yes became Yes and another Yes in one of their many iterations, I went on tour with Yes just on a holiday. I was about 16, I think. My brother and I went on holiday, and I spent a lot of time hanging out with Steve and spent a lot of time talking to him. And we got quite friendly. And then many years later, I was hitchhiking across the UK. And a friend of mine said, "Oh, don't hitch that last bit. I've got a train ticket you can use." So I ended up at a train station and Steve was there, oddly enough, picking up his kids. And he gave me a lift and we sort of reconnected. And it was from that point that we started working on music together. And he said, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm working on a record." He said, "Oh, well, yeah, I'd like to play on that." And we ended up working on this record called The Three Ages of Magic, which is an instrumental record. Very, that was the best way of putting it. It was written in the wonderful way that musicians always hope they get to work, which is you write all the music, you don't worry about what a record company says, you get to choose the musicians you want to work with, and you get to record it where you wanted to. So I sort of thought, great, I've got Steve, I found all these lovely local musicians that I knew from the southwest of England, and we recorded it in the middle of a barn, a tiny little studio in the middle of this huge barn in the middle of a farming complex, and it was just amazing. It was just the most amazing place to record it. And so that record then came out, and then over the time, as all these records do, they go out of print and then they disappear. And then when I left Yes, I ended up working with Gordon Giltrap, who was another fantastic guitarist. And so it seemed a perfect opportunity to pull all these two records together, and people could hear work that I did pre-Yes and post-Yes, and it just seemed to fall naturally into place. So that's the sort of, I could have given you a much longer answer, but that seemed to, that covers most of it.
Well, it's every bit of it's fascinating. I just wonder, with so many different styles, it's got to be, is it a challenge to sort of play to, once Mr. Giltrap's style versus Mr. Howe or something like that, or is it just comes naturally?
I think it comes naturally. I think you just find it all comes down to inspiration, essentially. As musicians, you end up working with somebody, and sometimes you can work with a musician that might be the most wonderful musician in the world, and nothing happened. And And sometimes you work with musicians and you just go, oh, that's fantastic, that's great, I can hear something that I get. And you know, Gordon would send me, when I worked with Gordon on the record Ravens and Lullabies, he would send me little snippets of guitar stuff. I'd say, send me any ideas, you got any bits and pieces, and he'd send me like a little guitar riff across, and I'd end up the next day sending him back like a demo of a fully formed song, and he would say, how did you hear that? And it was like, it just came, you just needed the spark, and that spark was enough to get me on the journey to actually finish the song. And then with the stuff with Three Edges Magic, working with Steve, obviously it was a different approach for Steve, because I was writing the music and he was executive producing and adding guitars on top. But as he was adding new instrumentation, I was finding myself taking things out that I would have wanted in there, because actually there's so much he's bringing to this. I want to make that the focus now. And that's one of the things I've learned over years of working with musicians, is I've always been very lucky in that I've always worked, even from when I was a kid, worked with people much older than me, which has always made me feel like the baby in the band. And so I've always had a lot to learn from these people, which is fantastic, because, you know, my dad always says to me, music is the world's longest apprenticeship. You never finish. You're always learning. And so I've been 16, 17 and playing in blues bands with people that were 15 years older than me. You just had to learn really quickly. And I remember sitting with Steve and I'd say, oh, I'm going to do a solo here, I'm going to start off and do a solo right at the beginning. He said, no. I said, why not? He said, the music hasn't earned a solo by that point. I said, why not? He said, you can't. You build up, you earn, you get the listener engaged with the piece of music to the point that the listener is actually now committed to this piece of music, and then you can start taking it in and improvise. And he said these sort of things which were really, really amazing things. And there's so many bits and pieces like that I found from these different musicians that I learned. And that's always what I love doing, working with musicians that are willing to share and who are very, very giving musicians. And the guys in Yes were always like that. They're always very generous musicians, I think.
Oliver, what was it like growing up with Rick Wakeman as your father? First off, it's a very obvious question, but it had to. He was obviously a huge influence on you, and he taught you everything he knows.
Well, yeah, it's going to sound really odd, but yes, he was an influence on me. We've only ever done 3 shows together, I think, in the entire time I've been
Wow.
growing up. And we never actually sat at a piano together at the same time.
Wow.
Until 2005, I think it was. So I was about 33, 34,
My
something
gosh.
like that. And we just didn't do it. We just talked about other things. And I remember once as a kid saying to him, oh, can you show me how to do that, Dad? And he said, learn it yourself. And I remember I said this to somebody once, said, oh, that's a bit harsh. And I thought, no, it's absolutely the right advice to give. You go and you learn stuff. So when I started the Yes tours, I did what any other musician doing that gig would do, which was I got all the CDs and I listened to them and I made notes and I stopped them and I started them and I rewound them and started and went for hours going, oh, what are they doing at that bit there? And slowly undid the jigsaw and managed to build all the keyboard parts. And this was 2008 when I joined Yes. So this was pre the days when you could go onto YouTube and somebody would have found all the separate tracks for you as well. So this was things that I would try to explain to my son, and he just looks at me like I'm an idiot. He says, well, why didn't you just go onto YouTube and find it? It's like, yeah, because it didn't exist then, Arthur. It didn't work like that. But I always think that advice that Dad gave me back then was really useful, because I do the same to my son now. I say, if you're just copying it from what somebody else has done on YouTube, you're not learning it. You're just doing a copy of what somebody else has done. Sometimes you can only understand it by actually feeling that you've put the work into, break it down and understand what's going on. So from the musical point of view, he didn't teach me or play with me, and we didn't sit around the piano together as kids and do stuff. But his music was obviously a big influence to me, but he left when I was 5 or 6, and I didn't see him again for another 6 years, I think it was. But I found my mum gave me some of his records when I got to my early teens, and I distinctly remember when Dad came back into the UK, his third wife Nina, I said to her, what's this Journey to the Centre of the Earth I keep hearing about? And then she just looked at, I remember this so clearly, she looked at Dad and just went, Rick? And he went, yeah. He said, how come your son here has never even listened to your Journey to Centre of the Earth record? And he went, don't know. He said, well, don't you think it would be nice that you let him have a copy so he can listen to it? And then I sort of listened to that and all the Yes stuff, and I just got really into that sort of music. So he inspired me with the music, because before that, when I was a kid growing up, I had No Earthly Connection, which is still my favorite record that he did. But my inspiration when I was a teenager growing up was John Lord, oddly enough, from Deep Purple, because I always thought what he did with an organ on, it's not, I always feel slightly bad with this, because I always tend to pick classic records that people go, well, that's the worst one they did. But for me, they're always like, I always really like Tomato by Yes, and most classic Yes fans will go, oh God. And then Deep Purple, Who Do We Think We Are, was always my favorite Deep Purple record. And I think that was, I know a lot of people said, oh, they hated each other at that point and were, arguing. But there's some tracks on there like Rat Bat Blue and I think it's Place in Line. And there's some unbelievable organ work on those records that as a kid listening to it was like, how on earth are you doing that? And then when I went to watch John Lord in concert and watch him just kicking the proverbial out of these instruments, it was completely different to what Dad had done, because Dad was always very controlled and very flamboyant. John Lord had a sort of almost animalistic approach to kicking these instruments to make them go further than they were designed to do. So he was a huge influence as well. And then I also got influenced a lot by Dennis DeYoung from Styx. I was a big fan of Styx growing up from the songwriting point of view, the way that they managed to fuse really interesting prog and instrumentation stuff into very accessible music. I will get back to your original point. I do apologize. I do
No, we love this.
This is great.
This is insightful. It's so insightful.
Then I end up in this weird journey, and then about an hour later I go, what did you ask me? So those were the inspirations that got me into wanting to write and perform. But growing up with Dad in the very early days, as I say, up until about 5 or 6, he wasn't around a great deal because he was always away on tour, or he was always playing or in a studio, and I was with my mum a lot. But I do remember some very weird things when I was growing up, which is we had the pinball table room, which was a room in the middle of the house where he just had his collection of pinball tables. And I remember as a kid going in that room a lot. I remember saying to a friend of mine about it, and they said, that's not normal, don't you? And I was like, isn't it? Doesn't everybody have a room like this? And they were like, no, they really don't. I was like, oh, okay. But you're a kid, you don't know any different. You just go, oh, okay. I thought everybody had one of these. And he had, and we had, what else did we have that I remember particularly? I remember laying on the sofa with him, and he had very, very long hair right down to his belt. And I was a 4-year-old. I had very long hair down to my belt. There's a lovely photo of the two of us laying down with our hair over our back. I remember that sort of thing. I remember that we had, I think it was the Tales from Topographic Ocean stage set in the garden for a while when they needed somewhere to dump it. So I remember looking out and seeing all these weird Roger Dean curve type things in the garden. And that all just sort of became sort of part of the norm, really. But people always sort of would say to me, God, that's a really amazing, unusual life growing up. But like I say, it was the only childhood I had. So I didn't really know any different to compare it to, if that makes, there is a sort of distorted sense there.
Yeah.
But I was sort of aware of what Dad did, but not to the point that it was an amazing thing. Because as well, when I started growing up in my early teens, was the early 80s, I was sort of thinking, I was born 72. So about 84, I was hitting 12, 85, hitting about 13. So I was becoming a teenager and started to go and buy records. And, prog rock really wasn't in vogue back then. That was really a period of time where all the musicians, the nostalgia kick really hadn't kicked in at that point. And they were all scrabbling around trying to find work and do stuff. And Dad was doing a lot of records, many records per year to try and sort of keep income coming in. And, I got almost bullied at school because of or teased, shall we say, rather than bullied, teased mercilessly about the fact that, Dad was appearing on Good Morning Britain and Pebble Mill at 1, which were British breakfast TV shows, talking about all these sort of obscure things. And all my friends were going, oh, it's not Duran Duran, is it? It's not Aha. And that's right. And it was really difficult because, it wasn't anything I could talk about. You almost had to sort of go, oh, just don't talk about it. And it was only when I got to be a teenager, sort of my late teens, like 16, 17, and one of the guys at school who had never really given me much time came over to me, and everybody was starting to discover music at that point. When you get to 16, 17 and you start looking at records that you would never have, and you suddenly go, what's this?
It's amazing.
And one guy came up to me, he went, just heard Roundabout. I went, oh yeah. I went, your dad's on that, isn't he? I went, yeah. He went, yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, you're all right. And walked off. And it was suddenly it all changed because they became a lot more aware of that world. And so those are the things that I really remember from growing up with Dad. So it wasn't so much about what Dad did while I was there. It was more about how the world changed in that period of time, and how, as we grew up, the opinion of having a father that did this changed. I mean, I remember going to record shops with my friends, and they'd all pick up Duran Duran records, Aha, whatever was in the charts, and I'd be in the queue, and I used to do this and pick up 2112 by Rush, and they were looking at it going, why are you buying a picture of a man with his bottom out on the front cover pointing? And it's like, well, because it looks really interesting, it looks like a great record, and it's like, you sure you don't want to pick up Aha? I was like, no, I'll pick this. And then I started to get to the point that I got a bit belligerent about it with them all. So we would go next time, and then I picked up a Deep Purple record, and they're like, why are you buying that? And then it got to the point, and I started, I'm going to push this even further. I started buying things by Gong. So I was buying like the Flying Teapot, these obscure prog avant-garde jazz type things. And I think they stopped asking me to go to town with them after that. But but so for me as a kid growing up, that was my journey into this sort of world of music. And the bottom line is I just like the craziness of it. I like the fact that it doesn't conform to rules, or there are rules, but you learn the rules, then you break them. That's what I sort of always liked about it. Does that answer the question in some form?
Absolutely.
I like how you said,
answer.
yeah, and I like how you say you learn the rules to break, and there's an art in that. And I wonder, like, because what you do is obviously considerably physical. Were there moments over the years where you had to physically train yourself to get your hands to do, some of these things? And how long would that take? I mean, is that part of the process?
Yeah, I mean, when you're touring, it's much easier because you're playing every night for 2 or 3 hours, and your stamina does build up. And then, I do sound checks every day. Even Yes were notoriously dreadful for doing sound checks. They would do a couple at the beginning of a tour, and then it was like, oh, we're not going to do it. So I would go religiously every day and do a sound check and play and just warm my fingers up. So I always found that bit okay. And then when I've had periods of time where I haven't been out touring, particularly over the last few years, where there's been a lot of, like I said, box set work, where you're collating information, you're tidying up mixes, you're listening to music. So you're not playing as much. And when I suddenly realized, I thought, I haven't sat and played the piano for ages. And I thought, I must sit down and play rather than just, collate music. I must sit and play and create or just practice. And my hands felt so stiff. I suddenly found myself going, God, how did I used to do this? This is really hard. And so I've actually now got myself back into the regime of actually practicing every day and just doing it to keep everything supple, because I'm getting older now, as much as I don't like to admit it. But I've got to suddenly realize that I've got to look after these things. And it also gets phenomenally frustrating when you could do something and then suddenly you're unable to. And my son had to do his very first concert the other day at school. He had to do something where they had to play in front of some people in a bad situation. He said to me, we had to play it 3 times in a row. He said, my hands ached. And I said, yeah, because you're only ever used to sitting there and playing it once, then going and doing something else. I said, my first show with Yes was 3 hours or 3.5 hours, something ridiculous like that.
Wow.
I said, and that's 3 hours of not just your fingers moving quickly, but trying to remember all the weird time signatures and counting. And because, of course, once you're on stage, you can listen to a record and play along to a record and everything's lovely and clear. The minute you get on stage and everything's bouncing around the walls and the sound's jumping out and you can't hear what you thought you were supposed to be listening to, and you sort of get to a point and you go, okay, I know it's 17 beats from this point. I start that. So you'll be going da 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 da, 1, 2, 3. But you get to 17 and you start the next bit. And it's all that sort of stuff. It was a very, very mentally challenging gig with Yes, because you're having to remember so much and compensate for all the stuff that goes on around a live show. Again, I'd say to my son, don't just rehearse to the level that's required for the show or the performance. Rehearse above it. So when all the things that are unexpected kick in and they take your concentration away, you're still above the level that you need to do to perform a decent show. And I hope that started to sink in, because that is somebody taught me that years ago, and it was such an important lesson, because the amount of times you're playing and you need that extra headspace to go, oh, keyboard's on the wrong sound, but I still got to do this, and I've got to make sure, oh, pedals stopped working, that keyboard's turned off for some reason, what do I do? You need to have that ability to keep doing what's required and still deal with these other things as opposed to panicking. But yeah, it's all fun days.
A life lesson that can work for anything too. I mean, that's actually quite brilliant.
Yeah, I'll try and remember who it was that said it, but up until that point, I'll take credit.
Well, it has weight coming from you, considerable weight coming from you.
When you come up with a plan to make music, how do you go about the topics that you've done? Frankenstein, Hounds of the Baskerville, stuff like that. Where do you come up with the themes to even start making the music?
I generally write. I generally just sit and write is where I generally start. And then some melodies come, ideas come, maybe some lyric ideas come. And then I write a piece, and then I suddenly almost write a story in my head of what I'm trying to do. And I try to write music that is maybe specific to a theme, but also has an emotional link to it as well. So you can take that piece of music out and it can mean something to somebody without without specifically saying, and then Roger turned around and said this to Steve, and then blah, 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 blah. So you don't end up making something particularly specific, because the beauty of music is that people will often interpret things differently to how you've written it. I've been working on, in this box set, there's a new live album, and I've been putting together some video footage. I've managed to find somebody that videoed one of the shows, and I'm putting some other bits and footage around it. And I played it to my wife earlier on and said, what do you think? Because in my head, the song was written about something happening in your life that was difficult. And the song's called Ravens Will Fly Away. And the ravens were all the sharp, hard things in your body, and you're trying to let them go, and you're trying to fly somewhere else. So the imagery in my head was desolation, ravens, all these sort of carrion type birds going on. And then an eagle or an owl or some sort of majestic bird flies away to lush Greenland. And, and that was the thing, darkness going into light and all this. That was my imagery for it. Was, as I wrote it, I remember feeling particularly bad. And it's like, no, I'm going to move myself away and get myself into a better space. And then she looked at it and she went, yeah, okay, I see what you've done there. I went, right. She went, doesn't mean that to me. I said, well, what does it mean to you? She said, I remember it thinking about when my dad died, how I had to let the pain go so that I could move on in my life. And I remember thinking, and that's always rung true with me, that it's about the emotion of a song that you're trying to get across. So what I do then, to answer your question, is I end up generally getting a few pieces that sort of group together. And then I sort of feel, okay, is there a direction that this piece of music is going in, or these collections of music that could become a themed album? So for 3 Ages of Magic, for example, I was living in Devon at the time, and a lot of the music I was writing was about stories that I was reading about Devon folklore. And then people, I think I did an article in a newspaper, and somebody said, that's what I said I was doing. And suddenly people they knew where I lived, and they would post articles through my door. So I'd wake up one morning, go downstairs, and there'd be a ripped out page out of a newspaper about another little story that was only local folklore. And I would sit down and go, oh, that's interesting. And then I'd suddenly sit and write and think about what I'd read in that thing. And those pieces, so suddenly those songs became the 3 Ages of Magic, which was about folklore and things. Whereas How to the Baskervilles and Jabberwocky, those two sort of rock operas I wrote with Clive Nolan, were because we knew we wanted to write something based on literature, and it was finding the right sort of story. And then something can happen that actually triggers where you go. I remember when we were writing this project, we didn't know what it was going to be called, and we were trying to decide what artwork we wanted for it. And I'm very good friends with the artist Rodney Matthews, who's you may know is very well-known artist, does an awful lot of classic rock record covers. And I phoned him up and I said, oh, we're thinking of doing this record about a literary piece of work. Have you got anything that we might be able to license off you? And then he said, oh, I've just finished painting the Jabberwocky. I'll send you a copy of the poster. And then the poster turned up and we looked at it and said, that's it. That's where the music has been heading towards. And the music that we'd written fitted perfectly with his imagery. And so we just carried it on. So there's always something that happens that make you go, this is the direction the music needs to go to. But for me, it's always about, I want to say it's always about the song, but because songs always imply that it's lyrics, it's always about the emotion that the piece of music or the song is trying to portray. Those are the bits that's important to me. And that's what generally gets me inspired about how to create either a standalone piece of music or a piece of music that's going to fit as a part of an album. Does that make sense? I think so.
Yeah,
it did to
absolutely.
me, sort of.
Well, I think that's why people say music is the universal language, and you factor in lyrics with that too. But I think when you talk about instrumental and the emotional dynamics, it takes that point even higher. So no, I think that does really connect. I mean, it's really powerful. It's like it goes beyond language and everything. You hear and you feel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've listened to some music in other languages, and I haven't got a clue what they're saying because I'm a typical British person, which means I speak English pretty well, but I'm always rubbish at doing languages, and I'm particularly bad at languages because
Me too.
I don't have the brain that understands it, and I have other people that I know that just are able to pick up languages without a problem, but I've always been really terrible. I've tried, but I'm terrible. But you can hear in the music, you can feel the emotion, you can hear in the way that the person is trying to deliver the lyric that you don't understand. You can hear whether they're happy, whether it's plaintive. You can get that. Yeah, it is like you say, a universal language. It's an amazing thing. If you tried to describe it to somebody that had never heard music, it wouldn't make any sense at all. But it is really an amazing thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you finding the current situation that we're all in with the pandemic, you finding it a fruitful time for your artistic works, or do you find it detrimental?
Yes and no. I think there's always the worry in the back of your head that it's affecting an awful lot of people, and as human beings we all generally care about each other, and we know that some people find it harder than other people, particularly when we were all in lockdown. I was very grateful for the fact that I had a garden where I could go and take my daughter and my son out, and we could go and have and yet you're aware that a lot of people didn't have that luxury, and so you're sort of you are aware that this situation is hitting people harder in different levels. So there's always that sort of element that you're always aware that it's affecting people in a different way. So once you take, once you appreciate that that is the way that the world is, and we just have to sort of find a way of getting through this situation. The other side of the coin, which is to do with the music and how I could best use this time that we had, was to try and go through music that I felt needed a chance to be heard, that maybe I wouldn't have had the time to go and do. So for me, I enjoyed that immensely, and it's given me a really good opportunity to go back through and find music. And like we were just talking about with songs, I found some pieces of music I'd never utilized, and it's like, actually, that's a really good idea. So I'm working on a new album from some of these ideas that I wrote years ago that had just been in a folder that I never would have considered, but I just suddenly went, actually, listening to these pieces of music now with the knowledge that I've gained since, I can actually rip those apart and actually make, because the theme and the melody and the emotion is really strong. Maybe I've learned more about instrumentation. So it was a great time to be able to spend time to actually delve into stuff. But I have found it particularly hard not playing live. Now, I don't play all the time, but I'd always sort of been quite proud of the fact that up until a year ago or 2 years ago, I had played every single year shows of some description, whether it was a band, whether it was abroad, whether it was a solo piano show, duet, trio with an orchestra, whatever it was. I'd always done something each year from the age of my first ever proper performance, which I think was probably 16 or 17. So I've done 30 odd years of playing every year and looking forward to things and thinking, right, I've got that coming, I've got that coming. And then to suddenly find that there was nowhere to go and play. And even now we're starting to come out of it, unless you're one of the very big, well-established bands with these audiences that have been sort of baked in around that artist. Some of us other artists who are a little reliant on real music lovers that go, actually, I want to go and watch that tonight. It's still a rather uncertain time, because I'm sort of still thinking, well, I'd like to go and play. But obviously there's a lot of not just financial implication that comes to putting a show together, but there's also the time element of rehearsing for a great deal of time and other musicians' times. And obviously a lot of musicians will get together to rehearse, and then they earn when they do the shows or the tour. And if you sort of then think, I'm still not sure that the venues are right, able to take the people on or make the money, it's still a period of time that's still a little uncertain. But there's a part of me inside that's just going, I just want to get out again. I want to put piano in the back of the car, drive somewhere and play in front of people and tell silly stories, which is what I like doing. That is, at the end of the day, the core of a musician is getting out and performing in front of people. Otherwise we wouldn't do it.
Right.
But I do miss it.
Is there you talk about the tremendous, like, playing above that level so that you're focused on what you're doing, but you can play, but you can handle other things that happen too. But is there a balance between doing that and then also, being able to feel the crowd when you play live and feel what they're feeding you? And, or is that the fuel? Does that make sense? Like, 'cause it feels like there's two very intense things that would be going on. You're feeling the crowd and their reaction, but you're also laser focused on very intricate work.
Yeah. And I think that is the same. It's part of the same thing. By having that extra consciousness, almost, you're giving yourself that ability to actually absorb other things that are going. You're not just getting on stage and going, right, I've got to start here and I've got to get through these 15 songs and then the show finishes. You want to be able to look at the audience at times. You want to be able to interact with the other musicians that are on stage. You want to be able to assess. Steve used to say this all the time. He used to say at the beginning of a show, he said, it's not just about the band. It's about the audience. It's about getting the band and the audience over the first couple of songs, realizing that they are on this journey together for the next 2 hours. And I always thought that was a really interesting way of looking at it. He said, because, you don't want an audience that's just sat there going, yeah, I paid my money, entertain me, please. And you don't want a band up there going, yeah, we're just going through the motions. There you go. There's our songs for you. You want to do it in a way that you do stuff. And then the audience goes, hey, that's really great. I loved what you did there. And then as a band, you sort of go, okay, you give each other glances and go, again? Yeah, we'll do it again. We'll keep going. We'll keep this going. I used to do a band that's called the Strawbs, which was another band that my dad played in years ago. And they asked me to do a tour, actually, while I was with Yes. And we went out to, I can't remember where we played. I think we played out in Cardiff, somewhere in Wales over in the UK. And the audience, the buzz we were getting from the audience just got better and better and better. By the end of the night, we used to do this piece of music called Where Is This Dream of Your Youth, which was a big, long improvised keyboard solo in the middle. And I used to get like 8 minutes just to go around keyboards and just solo. And it got more and more intense, and you'd push the keyboard stands to the point that the balance would not quite go, but then the keyboards would rock backwards and forwards, and making the Moog do all manner of daft things. And it was great, and you could just feel the audience going, hey, this is great, this is really unusual. And then you as the artist was going, I know I'm winding up the rest of the band here because they're just having to back me up for yet another minute, but I'm really enjoying myself, and the audience are really enjoying it. And that's how it works in a band sometimes. Some of the time you're the lead person, some of the time you have to drop back into the background and keep the rhythm going to allow somebody else to get the spotlight. And I remember that was fantastic. I remember thinking, I'm so glad that we have that ability to read what an audience is doing. And we got it just right, because we finished the show and we tried to walk off stage, and the audience locked the stage. They would not physically let us leave the stage until we went. We literally got to the side of the stage and then realized that the dressing rooms, we had to walk through the crowd, and they weren't going to let us. And it was literally like they were stood at the door, and it was like, well, we're going to have to go and play again. So we actually went up there and just sort of jammed something else. But I think if you are too detached from the audience, you don't, it's a symbiotic relationship, shall we say. I think that's the best way of putting it. You're performing a service, they're paying for a service, but it really isn't. It's an event that you share together, and you all have different roles to play, and they want to see that you're engaged with them. And I've always, that's really important. And sometimes for me, sometimes I can be a little bit concentrating on stage because there's quite a lot of parts to play and a lot of things to do, particularly with the keyboards in a band like Yes, because there's a lot of because Steve is such an extravagant guitarist, there's an awful lot of stuff where he's improvising or playing stuff or being the top lines. And so the keyboards have to really hold a lot of stuff together that gives the foundation for the vocals and everything else to pitch to. So a lot of the time you're sitting there concentrating, saying, I can't get this right. It's all got to go right. But so the other side of that is I'd always make sure I spent a lot of time with people after the show as well, because I wanted to, as a musician, you just want to talk to people and enjoy hearing that people had a good time. There's nothing better than being a musician, somebody coming up to you afterwards and saying, I really enjoyed that, made my night. So I think that's what you're looking for as a musician. Whether you're releasing a record, you want them to know that your music has touched them in a way when you're not around, or you performed and they've enjoyed themselves.
That's awesome.
I think that answers it. So
absolutely. No, it does. It does. It's you answer it, and you add so much more too, which is just like it's phenomenal. It really, absolutely.
When you're talking about Yes there, I mean, and you don't have to talk about any of this stuff, but I know it's water under the bridge, but talking to a Yes fan recently, and he'd mentioned that From a Page in his mind was better than the last two Yes albums musically. Do you have any what are your thoughts on that whole period of time? Is it frustrating?
It is slightly frustrating, because as a musician you want your music to be heard, and by doing From a Page the way we did From a Page means it didn't maybe get the reach that the other two albums got because they were current projects. But then I also have an immense gratitude that I was able to be a part of a band for 4 years that has its place in rock history. Now, I may not be one of the people that was a classic member of Yes, in so much as the Chris, Steve, Alan, John and Dad era of the band, but I do know that the era of the band with Benoit and myself, we worked really hard to try and help revive the Yes band once Dad didn't want to do it and John was ill. We wanted to make sure we could keep this thing afloat. And, we had admiration that Chris, Steve and Alan were having to shoulder the burden of expectations of the fans without John and Dad. And they tried it before with Trevor and Jeff, and it had been a tricky period of time for them. And so we were aware that there was they had pressure on them as well, which meant we had pressure because we wanted to make sure we delivered. But then when we started really gelling as a band, which was 2009, was a really good period for us. We went out on tour, we were on tour buses together, we were all spending a lot of time together, and we started writing together. And I remember Chris coming up to me once and saying, he said, there isn't a song in the Yes catalogue that this version of the band couldn't do justice to. And to me, that was almost like the best bit of praise I'd ever had in my life. The fact that he felt that we were to the standard of some of the stuff that they'd done in the past. That was tremendously, rewarding. And so we went. Sorry, my son's just coming to the room. I was trying to work out what somebody wanted. So that was really, really rewarding when he said that sort of stuff. And I remember thinking to myself, this is amazing. This is great. And then when we started talking about writing and recording a live album, to me that was like, okay, a live album would be fantastic because that cements you in their history. That cements you as somebody that was able to perform this music. And then the idea of it coming out on vinyl was just like, great, I'm going to be on a double Yes live vinyl album. That's a bucket list tick thing.
Yeah.
So I was really grateful to get that opportunity. And then when we got into the studio and started writing, and I suddenly realized that I was writing a lot of music, and the band were all going, yeah, that's really good. We really like that. We really like that. That was really rewarding. So I was starting to feel really like, maybe incorrectly, but I was starting to feel quite secure because I was performing what was required on stage. The fans seemed to take into Benoit and myself. And then I was writing music that the band felt was good enough to sit in the Yes canon, which was borne out years later when From a Page came out, that people said that nice stuff about the music. So when it all stopped happening for me with Yes, which basically came down to the fact that, they wanted Trevor Horn on board. Well, actually, it was my suggestion that Trevor Horn came on board. But Trevor obviously had a view of what he wanted to produce as a Yes album, and I didn't fit with his view of that album because he wanted Jeff to be there. And I think, Chris Stephen Allen, who had tried to keep their ship afloat, had to make a decision as to whether they felt working with Trevor was better for them or whether maintaining Benoit and myself was better for them. And unfortunately, the dice didn't fall for me. Now, how that would have been had it gone the other way, I don't know, but I think the record might have been equally as well received as Fly From Here. And maybe the follow-on records, we would have just got better because we would have been developing and working together and spending more time together. And I'm still, I'm quite a prolific writer, so I could have brought lots of more stuff to the band, because as soon as I left Yes, I went off and did Ravens and Lullabies, which, got an awful lot of good reviews and won some awards for songwriting and stuff. So in my head, there's almost like there's a sort of a pathway which I'd love to have seen how it would have worked out. As to criticizing what the band did after I left, I wouldn't do that because I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that, because they made a decision, they went down a direction, and they're all phenomenal musicians and phenomenal writers. But I think for me, I'm just grateful that people got to hear that I was a recorded member and a live performing member, and I actually added something to the history of the band. So when people say things like those pieces of music are better than anything else they've done, that's sort of really rewarding from a personal point of view. But it's very difficult to sit there, and I'm never a complainer about things like that. I don't think I'm in a position to complain about the fact they gave me an opportunity to go out and play around the world and play wonderful music and record some music and have a Roger Dean cover on a record that I wrote. It's disappointing the way it ended. And would I like to have stayed? Yes, of course I would have done. And do I think we could have done some great music? Yeah, I think we could have done some great music. But life throws you curveballs all the time, and you just have to dust yourself down and go, okay, I did 4 years with them. I learned an awful lot. How can I now channel that into the next thing that I do and take that learning with me? And that's what I like to think I do. And I think if I hadn't had that approach, they might not have been so enthusiastic and supportive of the From a Page record. That may never have happened if I'd not been that sort of person, because there would have been a lot less incentive to try and let people hear that as well. I think that's how I view it anyway. That's how I feel comfortable.
It's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah. And when you learned all that material, going back to when you first joined Yes, I mean, how did you, there were so many different styles, your dad's, Jeff's, Tony's. Can you talk about just, you had the sheer volume of catalog to learn and those styles? I mean, what was that? What was it like going through all of that?
It was pretty intense because we didn't get the final set list until our first show. Actually, let me just go again. Our first show was in November, I think. And we had 2 weeks rehearsal before the first show. And I didn't get the set list of what we were doing until a week before I flew out. So it was 3 weeks from here's your set list to here's your first show. And it was 3.5 hours long, the first show, or 3 hours long. And we also rehearsed stuff that we didn't play. And so it wasn't just that. So I had a week before I went out, just literally trying to break down all the music and work out where all the parts were. I had copious notes everywhere, all over the keyboards. Every keyboard that I've got now in the garage has got tons and tons of ripped off masking tape, where all this tape was all over these keyboards with little bits of score to remind me what to play here and little chord sequences there when we got to different parts. But when we got to, there was a bit before that was really tricky, because when I spoke to Steve about it, I said, okay, so you sent me the records to listen to. How do you want to approach the show? Because when Dad plays the shows, he plays a different solo in Close to the Edge, and he plays a different solo in Roundabout, and he plays a different solo in And You and I. And they said, well, we'd like to make it, we want it to be a bit more authentic. And I thought, well, okay, I can bring that to the band. I can bring the authenticity back to the original music, which maybe over years years of playing, they've thought, oh, I don't have to learn that solo, I'll do something else. You know, I'm Rick Wakeman, I can play a different solo, and the fans will think that's great because I've earned the right to do that because that's who I am. Whereas me coming in, I couldn't just go, okay, I'll take the easy route, I'll come up with my own solo for Roundabout, because I would have felt that I was cheating people that wouldn't expect. I hadn't earned the right to do that. So what I could do for the fans was go back and learn the original And You and I solo, and learn the original the Roundabout solo as close as I could get it to what I could hear on the records. And the same with Close to the Edge, taking all these things back and actually breaking them down to the component parts, tidying the bits up that were just sort of so quick in studio you couldn't even work out what was going on, and actually having these things done in a way that I could perform them night after night in an accurate way. And so I did all that, and I worked all that through. And I said to Steve, okay, so I've listened to all the records, I've got all the bits worked out. Anything else I should know? And he said, yeah, over the years, we've changed the arrangements. So you have to listen to the live albums to hear how we play them now. Like Roundabout has different sections under the chorus. You suddenly go to the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da instead of the da-da-da-da-da-da. And I was like, yeah, but I've learned them to the records. And he said, yeah, what we want you to do is do the live arrangements that we've done with the band over the last few years.
Oh my gosh.
But with the original arrangements. So I
Wow.
didn't have anything I could play along to that actually was what I was doing. So I had to sort of remember different bits with the live albums, but actually put the original bits back on top. And then, of course, when I got to America, I had a brand new keyboard rig that I'd never used before that we had to build out in America because I couldn't fly everything over to America. So I had all this new stuff. I had a new keyboard tech. And then we turned up, and then, of course, Chris, Steve, and Alan have been playing Close to the Edge for 30 years. I'd never played it with anybody before. And so I had a real, intense learning curve. Whereas maybe in the past, when I've worked with other bands, they, the Straubs and stuff said, oh yeah, interpret it your way, do your bit, do this, do that, that'll be great. Whereas with Yes, it was like, actually, I can't do that. I've got to be on the money. And so those next 2 weeks, I thought, it's okay. I've got 2 weeks of rehearsals. We do 9 till 5. That's okay. It's 8 hours a day, 2 weeks of rehearsals. That's 14 days. I reckon we could be really smooth by that point. And then they sat down for the first rehearsal, and then there was a lot of talking. I got to the end of the first day, and I think we played Owner of a Lonely Heart, and that was it. And I remember thinking, right, that's 13 days. And then we got to the end of the day, and then Chris said, right, so we'll start tomorrow at 1 then, shall we? And I was like, oh, we're not going to start till 1 o'clock every day. He said, yeah, and we'll stop around 4:30, something like that. And I was like, so my idea of like 8-9 hours, it got cut down to 3.5 hours. And they said, oh, and on Thursday, we're doing a photo shoot. And it was like, right, so 13 days are now down to 12, and they've all been halved in length. And he said, oh, we'll have the weekends off. It was like, okay, so what I would do is I would go into the rehearsal room with my headphones and all the records, and I would just go through the songs for 6 hours before they even turned up. And it was the only way I could get all this knowledge in order to do the first show. And I remember sitting in my hotel room one night going, my brain felt like it was going to explode because it was almost like climbing the mountain. And then I was literally at that point where I'm not sure how much more I can even think of here. And I literally just got to that point where bits started to sit under your fingers. And then as you went on tour, you've suddenly found, like we talked about that headspace, I suddenly found that I had the ability to actually think of a different thing, do something a bit differently, and start do stuff, think about things in a slightly different way. And I could actually start picking things up as well. I remember saying to Chris one day, I said, why are you finishing on C in Astral Traveller at that point? I'm finishing on B. And he went, you always finish on C. I said, you finish on B. He said, no, you finish on C. And I said, listen to the record, listen to what Tony did. And he went, God, he finishes on B. And he went, I finished on C though. And on the record, he went, God, we did it wrong. So we suddenly found that we were correcting things like that in the studio. And then there's other bits where we were doing Machine Messiah, and Chris turned around to me once and he said, I'm probably taking way too much of your time. There's
No, not at all.
This is
No,
great.
this is not at all. We could talk about this for hours.
We were doing Machine Messiah, and I remember him saying to me, he said, it's great that you do that keyboard rundown at that point, and then you got the strings going on there at that string part. And I said, yeah, it's great. He said, on the record, and I could tell what's coming. He said, there's another part that comes in. And I went, right. And he said, could you put that in as well? And I said, Chris, I've got 2 hands. I cannot play a third part. And I remember him looking at me to this day, he said, oh, you'll find a way. He just turned around and walked away. And I had to do this weird thing where I could play one part, and then I ended up having to have like keyboard pedals sellotaped together so that I could hit the 2 pedals with one, and typing a bit of wood across these 2 sustains, so that I could put my foot sideways on across 2 pedals while the first one's sustained, get the second one going, then lift up my heel to take the pedal off the first one and get the third being going while still doing the run there. And I remember finishing the show going, oh, and he went, yeah, I told you you'd get away. And And then he did something on Siberian Khatru where he went, there's a bit in the middle. He said, where the main riff, dun, 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 dun. He said, there's a minor version of that going. And I said, well, it's sort of in seconds, Chris, seconds and fourths. He said, no, there's a section there where we go and it goes into minor. And Chris had the most amazing memory. He wouldn't play a bass in between tours, and then he'd start rehearsing and just be straight away. Unbelievable memory. And he said to me, "Oh, this bit in Siberian Khatru." And I said, "Okay, I didn't hear it when I listened to the record." He said, "No, there's a whole minor bit. That whole bit there's a minor keyboard section." And I listened. I went, "Okay, you must be right." So I went back in and listened to the record. It's not there. And I said, "Chris, can you just listen to the record?" And he listened to it, and he went, "Oh, you're right. It's not there." So I remember we did it in the studio. Could you work out what we think we probably would have wanted, and just put that little bit in there? So I had to sort of listen to the song and think, okay, what would they have done here to do that riff in a minor sort of way? And I came up with something. He went, "Yeah, that's it. That's the one. Yeah, brilliant. Throw that in tonight, could you?" And so you ended up developing the pieces as we went through the tour, which is tremendous fun.
Yeah.
Slightly panicky at certain points, but it was good fun.
Such a brain exercise too, I imagine. I mean, my gosh.
I tell you what, 3.5 hours went like that. It just so quick.
Wow.
Amazing. Fast forward to that first show when you're up there with Chris and Steve. I mean, what was that like for you? Just going out there.
I remember thinking before we went out, I don't generally get nervous about performing because it's just what I like doing. But I knew there was a certain weight to this because of the fact that Dad and John weren't there and the expectations of what Yes fans were. So I was very aware that it was never going to be a perfect fluid show, because that only happens in a tour once you get going. No matter what band it is, they'll always start off, you get better as the tour goes on. I think that's established. But I wanted to make sure we hit the tour as well as we could to get the expectations. I remember we got through, I remember sitting in the dressing room and watching a Star Wars movie on my phone, just doing anything to take my mind off of the fact that we were going to be going out there and going, "Oh, I wish we just had one more day. Wish we just had one more day." But then we went out and we got through Siberian Khatru, and then I think we went on to Seeing All Good People after that. At which point that thing clicked. The audience were with us and they weren't judging us. They were there to enjoy themselves. They sort of went, "These sound like Yes songs should sound." And Benoit was uncanny in sounding like John. My daughter loves listening to Live in Leon. She just loves it. So we have it on in the car all the time. And I forget sometimes when I'm listening to some of those tracks like Starship Trooper that it's not John, because he is so close to John at times. Other times I go, "Oh, it's Benoit." I can hear the French Canadian twang in his voice. And because I spent a lot of time talking to Benoit, I got really used to his speaking voice. But there's certain times when I just forget and it's John and it sounds like John. So I think once we'd gone through a couple of tracks and the audience were hearing that Benoit sounded like John, Chris, Steve and Alan sounded like Chris, Steve and Alan, and I'd actually was playing organs and string sounds and pianos and Rhodes that sounded like original Yes, I think people were going, "Actually, this sounds what I hoped it would sound like." And Dad had this habit of when he went on stage, he gets different keyboards, he brings his new rig out, and so he'd change the sounds around and try different variations and do stuff. And the fact that it then sounded, I'm not going to say it was not better, but it sounded different and maybe more authentic to what people that listened to the records heard. That was like this is different, but what I expect Yes to sound like. And so by the end of the show, we got to the front of the stage and everyone was cheering and standing ovation. And we sort of walked off stage. And I remember thinking, that was amazing. That was just amazing. And when I toured before, I'd sort of maybe done 6 or 7 shows in a row, a short tour, a couple of weeks here and there, my own band going out once a week or something like that. And then I suddenly went and said, "I've got to do 30 more of these." And it was a sort of feeling of, we've got to make sure we do it this well every night. And that was sort of like, "Oh my God, I hope we do that." Along with, great, we get to do this for 30 more times. And that was so exciting. Like when's the next one?
Yeah.
And I think by about show 5, I think we sort of hit our stride. We all felt comfortable with each other. We'd all got the eye contact at the right point. We were, supporting at the right point. That, Chris and I were really locking together in the bit behind Steve's impromptu solo section in Yours Is No Disgrace. We got to that point where you just suddenly go, yeah, we're a bit of an oiled machine now, and we're really enjoying it. And that was particularly exciting. So that first show to the first 5 shows were daunting, but great fun, and I thoroughly enjoyed them. Although, I remember the second show we did in Toronto, I think it was, when oh, I'm going to sound dreadful now. Is it Larry from Styx came along? He came and
oh yeah, yeah.
yeah, he came along
Okay,
and watched, and I got to meet him afterwards, and it was like, because obviously I was a big Dennis DeYoung fan, and he just joined Styx, and I remember sort of feeling, oh, he's going to be watching me going, oh, he's done that wrong, or that's different, you know, because he's another keyboard player, and you're sort of going, but then you start to get into the flow of it, and you do these shows, and you suddenly start realizing you're meeting amazing musicians that you'd followed as a kid, and I was suddenly on the same circuit as these people, and you were going to watch each other's shows when you weren't playing, and suddenly it was great because you could actually talk to these people not just as a fan, but you could actually just talk and get to know them, or have a bit of a chat. The Stone Temple Pilots came and hung out with us at a show, or the guys from Dream Theater. I got to speak to Mike Portnoy on regular occasions, but often catch up, and I'd say, hey, I'm in town, you're going to come to the show tonight, and he was always a big Alan White fan, so he'd come along and do that, and you go, oh, here's the latest transatlantic record, and it'd be, oh, fantastic, that's great. And we would do that a lot, and that was wonderful. And I remember, in particular, I do remember one moment for me, which was going to see, we were in Europe on tour, and we went to see them Crooked Vultures, the band with John Paul Jones.
Oh yeah, Dave Grohl.
And Dave Grohl, and we went to watch that, and I remember sort of standing backstage watching Dave play and watching John Paul Jones, and it was like that was a moment that was like, oh, this is pretty cool. And then afterwards I just went backstage, and I was with Chris at the time, and Dave Grohl was in his dressing room, and I was just sort of stood outside because I know what it's like after a show. Sometimes you just want a few moments, and so I didn't go and disturb him. And he just looked up and he said, "Yeah, okay." And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." He said, "Come on in," and we sort of just had a chat about after show stuff. And he was sort of saying, "Yeah, I'm going to give my family and kids a call in a second." And I sort of I said, "Yeah, it's exactly what I do because it's the UK. When I'm in America, it's the UK. So when I go to bed at 2:00, they have breakfast. So we used to have a computer in the corner of the breakfast room where I would just have my evening snack while they were having breakfast. And we just sort of got talking.
Yeah.
We got talking about how we interacted with our families whilst out on tour. And that was a really nice thing. You suddenly realize you have these interactions with other musicians and how they fit normal life around this absurdity of getting on a bus or a plane and going to a different place with essentially a traveling shop every day. It's fascinating, all the other stuff that goes on around the actual show. It's a whole world in itself. It's amazing, really.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, the life, and especially as when they're older and the families are involved, that's awesome. Yeah, it's like a full experience. Yeah, I bet. Wow. This is we've learned so much. Are you good on time? Do you still have a little more time, or
yeah, I'm okay. Yeah, I'm okay.
This is great. No, because we're good. I just want to make sure you're good. Yeah, because I was wondering, like, one of the things that came to mind too is how it's not just the musicianship you play along with, but you're dealing with an institution like Yes, and to be a part of that, like there's a lot of bands that are out there that have been around a long time, but to be an institution and to be able to play every era of that is just it's got to be such a life accomplishment. And then to go and do your own thing, it's like, how wonderful is it for you to have all these wonderful associations, your own work, Yes, other projects. It's got to be incredibly satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same as any person in life that you go, you have good days and you have days where things get on top of you. And then I have on the box set collaborations, there's the Ravens and Lullabies album, which is the album I did after Yes. There's a track on there called Is This the Last Song I Write? And it was all about that feeling as a musician, and particularly because I just left Yes and I didn't know whether people were going to be interested in what I did post Yes. And that whole song came about, will anybody wait at the stage door? Is that part of my life now gone? So you end up with insecurities because, obviously you've gone through quite a big life change from 1 minute doing all this stuff to the next minute sort of almost having to find a new pathway to express yourself. And so that sort of song there is a really emotive song for me. It's the centerpiece of that album, really. And then I made a point actually of many years ago, making sure I always got a copy of everything that I'd ever been involved with, whether it was a session or whether it was my own album or whatever. And I have just above me up here there's a shelf, and on there is every record that I've been involved with and some of the little award things that I've been sent over the years. And whenever I'm feeling like, oh, I can't do it, what as we all do at times, we all sort of go, oh, what's the point? I just look there and I go, you can do it, and you've got proof right in front of you there that you have the ability to do these things. That generally bucks me up from those sort of things. And And so so rather than going at it as going, yeah, I'm really lucky because I've done all these things, I actually use it as a way of actually going, actually, you can do this. And I say to my son all the time, I said, it's just, as a musician, play any way you can, play with anybody. And even if it's people you don't particularly get on with, you will always learn something from each other as musicians. That's one of the joys of music. And I keep saying to him, because again, he's a young musician now, so he does a lot of stuff on garage bands, he plays the piano on his own, blah, blah, blah. I said, you need to get together with a bass player, you need to get together with a guitarist, and you need to pull a piece of music apart and try and play it together and understand what it's like to actually be responsible to another person on stage, not just you doing your thing. And I said, and then you'll do stuff, and then you'll get your CDs or your records or things, and you suddenly start building a little catalog that builds your confidence. And I think, to answer your question about all the things that I've done, the main thing for me is that I've always been I've always given everything to every record I've done, whether it's with Yes, working with Gordon, my solo records, instrumentals, new age records, rock operas, whatever I've done, I've always put everything into it. And I think that's the thing I'm probably most proud of, is the fact I can look at every single record that I put out under my own name and gone, actually, yeah, I'm proud of what I put there, which I think is slightly difficult for people to do now, because there's so many channels for people to put music out so easily that I worry how that is for people now, because you can end up putting out stuff that maybe in 5-10 years time you wouldn't be that pleased of, but there's nothing you can do about it because you haven't been able to. You've been so keen to get people to hear what you do, whereas when I was younger, I would just play it to maybe 5 or 10 people that were around me who would have gone, yeah, that's a good idea, or I don't like that, or yeah. But suddenly you can put it out there to everybody. There is a maturity that comes to working as a musician and writing and getting to a point where you suddenly feel, okay, I think I'm ready now to actually put this stuff out. I sat there with my son the other day, we were listening to some stuff, and I said, this is a song I wrote when I was 15. This is a song I wrote when I was 17. This is 18. And he listened to it and he went, these are great. You must put these out. And I said, no. He said, why not? I said, because they were part of my learning how to do it journey. You can hear me here experimenting with rhythm in a chorus and making words and the music syncopate. You can hear what I'm trying to do. And the song, yeah, it's you're hearing it and going, oh, it's great, put it out. And I'm going, no, I don't want to put that out because it doesn't actually convey what I am, but it was part of my journey to get to where I am as well. And so I'm trying to desperately rein in his enthusiasm to go, look at me, I can do all this, along with, in the longer run, it's better to have a measured approach to what you release. Again, completely different answers to the question you asked me.
No, but it's great. I mean, because I like how you show, kind of what you have in the, it's proof. It gets you out of that, if you're in the funk or whatever, it not only shows, yes, you can do it, but you've got the proof right there. And then, and it just lights the fires again. No, I love that. I mean, I think that's the best sort of motivation is, hey, it's right there. We did it,
Yeah. And I still get inspired by the musicians. I'll still listen to some of the old records that I used to love as a kid, and I'll hear new music every now and then, and I'll just go, oh, that's great. Or it inspires me. Or I'll watch someone else playing and go, how did they do that? That's and I have to sit and try and work out what they did. And that I think a good bit of, I can't remember whether I came up with this or whether this is another one that somebody told me that I'll just end up taking credit for, but I try and explain to my son as well, because when he looks at someone, he goes, oh, they're really good at doing that, oh, they're great, I can't do that. And you sort of go, actually, as musicians, we start off at the trunk and we all start off learning this basics of music and understanding how it does, and then we start to follow a branch that is a specialism or an area that we're interested in, and we end up on a branch over here, whereas the person you're envious of is on a branch over here. And it's because they've taken a completely different route. That doesn't mean you can't learn what they've done, but their journey to get to that point to be able to do what they do is different to yours. And that doesn't make the fact that you can't do what they do doesn't make what you do any less important. As long as we've all got past that trunk bit where we've learned our basics, that's what being a musician or being an artist is. It's actually creating something that is unique to how you are as a person. And then hopefully you find people along the way that like what you do and then take the journey with you. And I'm trying to explain that to him as well, because I think it's very difficult as well for people now with so much stuff available on YouTube and places. People can look, it's a bit like the social media problem where everybody looks at somebody sitting by a swimming pool going, oh, they've got a better life than me. It's all that sort of stuff. It's that horrible feeling of, oh, where have I gone wrong? And I'm trying to explain to my son that's not the way to look at it. Look at what you achieve, the journey you take, and have the things that make you feel proud for the stuff you have achieved, and that's the only thing you can do.
Great philosophy.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
That's why I can't stand social media, but
it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming.
It is overwhelming. What are there any contemporary artists, Oliver, that really inspire you? For some reason, Stephen Wilson comes to mind. Has he ever reached out to you?
No, I haven't actually. I haven't. I don't know Stephen. I know John Mitchell very well, who's the guitarist with Lonely Robot, and he's great friends with Stephen. So John and I are talking a lot at the moment. So I'm hoping to get to meet him at some point. I mean, I'm a music fan as well as a musician. So I remember, say contemporary musicians, to me they're new or contemporary, but to anybody else they're like, I've been around for ages. Like, I remember meeting Neil Morse at an award ceremony, and thinking, this is cool. And I remember saying to him, I really enjoyed the record Snow that he did with Spock's Beard, and he was going, it was a terrible time. I said, yeah, I loved it. It's a great record. I distinctly remember that day, actually, because it was me, Dad, and Neil Morse, and I can't remember, someone else there. And Mick Portnoy was there. He said, I want a photograph of this. He says it's like a clutch of keyboard players. I just remember him saying that to me at the time. But it was so. I do hear new bands and people doing different things. But I'm sorry, I keep relating everything back to my son, because he's who I talk to most about this sort of stuff, because he's really into music. As I'm getting older, I find less time to do things. And if I want to listen to music, because I'm such an analytical person, I can't help but listen to something and try and work out what somebody's done. So I will generally go back to music before I was in that state of mind, so I can actually enjoy it for the songs that it was, rather than the song that I'm trying to analyze, if that makes sense. So I can have a lot more fun listening back to an old Deep Purple record or a Zeppelin record than hearing something new and going, what have they done there? What are they doing? But my son plays me stuff all the time. He's really getting into big band stuff, and these bands that play, big band versions of computer game music. He's always playing me these sort of things. And there's some great stuff, some amazingly talented people around. I'm trying, as I'm talking to you, I'm desperately trying to go into my head, please think of somebody that you've listened to recently that makes you not look unbelievably old. Who do I listen to recently? I'm sorry, I was listening to Dave Gilmour earlier on today.
It's all right.
Dave
okay.
Gilmour.
It's all good.
When anybody ever asks me, I just go blank. So
yeah, same.
Well, I'm a big Pink Floyd fan, but now I'm trying to branch out into all the stuff they did separately, like On an Island, and I'm trying to get to more. I mean, I'm a big obscure Floyd fan as well. I enjoyed the song If a great deal, and obscured by crowds, and Atom Heart Mother I really, really love as a record. That's so to me it's all the classic stuff, but I actually like delving back further into the past and seeing how these bands got to that point. And then you sort of find all their offshoots, which is there's still so much to learn there. And I think, when I got into music in my teens, I was really lucky, because Deep Purple already had 10 records available. Led Zeppelin had 10 records available. I sort of dread to think what it must have been like in the 70s, having to wait a year for the next record by a band that you really liked. When I was lucky enough growing up in the 80s, I really like that Deep Purple record. Oh, great, there's 5 others. Which one should I choose next? And so finding an artist now and then having to wait for their next record is difficult. But I could sit and talk to you for hours about artists, but they wouldn't be particularly contemporary.
Yeah, no, it must have been interesting. Like going for you, you mentioned the 80s, and I wonder, you probably were maybe about 10 or so, 11. So maybe this is too young, but like when Yes did end, and then they kind of came back as Cinema. I know your dad wasn't involved in that, but like, did you get a sense of kind of what was happening in the Yes world when Cinema kind of came back and they got Trevor Rabin, and then I should say, Yes kind of came back around with Trevor Rabin, then went from Cinema to Yes, and that whole thing, like, did you get a
We were raised in a generation where exercise was only used to lose weight and be skinny. Let's flip the script. We were raised in a
sense of kind of the newer era of the band forming at that time, and have any thoughts on it?
Not at all, because that was the period of time where Dad had sort of just come back into my life at about 11.
I got you.
He'd come back from Switzerland, so that's when I started to get into the early Yes stuff, and I started to sort of start from the beginning, the Journeys, all that sort of stuff, and Tales from Topographic Oceans and Close to the Edge. And then probably a few years later, about 3 or 4 years later after that, I did pick up 90125, and some of my school friends started getting into it, and we were like, and I remember thinking, my ear's okay here, because they were all going, what's Changes doing at the beginning? I can't understand this riff. What's it doing? And I said, well, it's doing this and that. It's just a pattern of 2s and 3s. And they were like, oh yeah, we couldn't figure it out. And it just, I'm like, and I really loved that record.
Me too.
And
yeah.
then, of course, it got into, I really liked Big Generator. Again, I'm one of those people that everybody else goes, oh, Big Generator, dreadful compared to the other. I always really enjoyed Big Generator. It's a great record. But so it was probably after Big Generator came out, because I bought Big Generator and 90125 at a similar sort of time. And it was probably after that I started to get a bit more involved in it, because that's when ABWH came about after the Talk era of the band. I remember Talk coming out and ABWH happened. And that's when I started to really sort of get involved in it again, because I was probably about 16, 17. And then I got to go on the tour and watch them play the shows. And I started to get into the music, and obviously got to know Steve, and I sat in on some recording sessions. And that's when I sort of really started to really go, oh, actually, you become aware of the history a lot more, I think, at that point, rather than just the records. You become aware of the people and everything that goes around it. And I think that was it for me, which is probably, again, going back to when I was in the band, probably why people always say, oh, you know, I talk about Chris a lot. And I do talk about Chris a lot. And it's probably because Chris was always a slight enigma to me, because he wasn't in ABWH. I know Alan wasn't either, but Chris was always sort of like this larger than life character. And I didn't know him. And when I got to meet Chris for the first time and we started to work together, we got on really well. And we spent a lot of time, you know, talking outside of band stuff, you know, and I had a lot of time for him. I got, you know, individually, I got on with them all extremely well. But I did get to meet Trevor a few times. I got to play with Trevor, actually. We did a show in the Greek in LA with Trevor. He came along and did a guest spot with us. So I had Steve and Trevor on stage playing Out of a Lonely Heart at the same time.
Oh wow.
That was quite a moment when you sort of look across and sort of go,
oh, man.
Yeah, that was just nice. You just turn up, you sort of think, oh, it's another little bucket list tick there.
Absolutely.
Right there. Yeah.
Oh man.
Is your dad still talking to Steve and stuff?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't really talk to Dad about what he does musically. And it sounds odd because people go, but you've got him right there. Why don't you speak to him? I mean, he's on the other side of England to me. But generally, when we talk about comedy shows and we talk about cars. Music just sort of, you know, he'll say to me, he said, I'll see you nice and busy. I said, oh yeah. He said, yeah, I'll see you on Twitter. And that's how he gets his knowledge of what I'm doing musically. And that's how I get my knowledge of what he's doing musically. And then we just generally just talk about cars. That's really, cars or comedy shows. That's really it. Then he'll tell me some joke. And I think he's trying to gauge as to whether it's good enough to tell somebody else or not. And that's generally how our relationship goes, and it works quite nicely like that, because it's you know, we're all keyboard players in the family. My brother's a keyboard player, my sister plays keyboards, obviously Dad plays, I play, you know, my son plays, Adam's daughter plays. I mean, everybody playing the piano in our family isn't actually something unusual. It's, you know, if someone can put a shelf up, that gets a bit of awe from somebody in the family. You know, it's like you put a shelf up. It's not like you wrote a symphony. It's like you put a shelf up and the wall didn't fall down. Wow. When my dad bought a Wendy house for my little lad once, a little toy house in the garden, and I remember him saying to me, are we going to get to put that together then? It's like, I think I can manage that, Dad. But he was just, you know, just a different world. But that's what it is for us as a family. And we do get together and do the very occasional family show. I think the last one we did was about 5 years ago now, where we put the keyboards in the shape of a W and 4 of us play. We've done a couple of those. They're quite good fun. They're quite good fun shows, and generally very thrown together. But, you know, we're all okay at doing the chat. So we generally have quite a good laugh up on stage. Although I think Dad got rather annoyed when my brother and I covered his keyboards with retirement home brochures, which was just before he walked out on stage.
That's funny. Psych him out a little bit.
That's a good trick. It's a good prank.
That's a good trick. I love it.
Oh, it's fantastic. So what's next for you? You said you're working on a new record, and
yeah, well, we've got the box set collaborations, which is the 3 Ages of Magic with Steve Howe, Raisins and Lullabies with Gordon Giltrap, and then there's the live album in there. I want to do another box set, which will be my solo records, to sort of package up the career. But then there's this album which I want to work on, which is called Anam Cara, which is like a Celtic rock record, which I've been wanting to do for a long time. So I'm going to try and find the time to do that, because it gives me my opportunity to bring in, you know, great vocalists, but also because it has a sort of Celtic feel, I can bring in different musicians. I want to start. I love working with violinists. I'd like to work with a violinist and a flute player and those sort of instruments that when you do projects like this, you can bring them in because they add a texture and an identity to a record that maybe me working with my 5-piece band I couldn't do, because it sounds, if I'm doing a thing with my own band, it's a 5-piece rock band, and if I suddenly have a flute solo in the middle of one track, it doesn't make sense. Whereas the idea of doing a record, a bit like Three Edges of Magic, where I had Ilian pipes on there and whistles and violins, it added another layer of texture to help the theme work. And that's how I feel about this Celtic record. I wanted to involve some of those more traditional instruments on top, as well as a nice big beefy electric guitar and a good, really good acoustic guitar player as well. So that's what I'm going on to next. So that's and the challenge with that is making sure everything has enough space to be heard, add to the music, add to the songs. And I like challenging myself. I like trying to do something that's different to the record that came before, which I think is probably part of my downfall sometimes, because it means somebody that buys a record that I do, it's never the same as the previous one. It's not the same style as the previous one. But then I think as an artist, you just have to do what you feel and what you think is the right thing to do and what you want to do. People used to say to me, why did you write that record? It's like, because no one else did. And I enjoyed listening to it. And so no one else wrote it, so I did. And if someone else likes it, then great.
I like that. It's a great answer. You always have these great answers. You should write a philosophical book. It's fantastic. Seriously, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's because I've got a terrible memory, though, so I would never remember what I've said.
Who said it? No, I'm just kidding. One thing I was curious about too, if you had just a couple more minutes, was one of the great things we talked about YouTube. One of the greatest things on YouTube is the shows from your father's interviews, his TV show, and I saw the one with Tony Iommi and Ian Anderson. And I'm wondering, I imagine you've seen those, and I'm just curious, what's it like to see the interaction between your father and these other icons, and have you gotten to kind of meet some of those folks too, and what's that been like?
Yeah, I mean, I said earlier on, I met most of them when I was sort of on touring, is when I've come across most of them. But there's also times when these people are just around, and you just get, I like Rodney Matthews. And it sounds dreadful, I love working with musicians, but I have a real affinity for artists. I love artists. I can talk to artists for hours, because I think I can draw and I can paint, but I can draw and paint in a way that is learned. So when I was at school, I had some friends that were amazing painters and artists, and I'd say, God, I wish I could do that like you do. And they'd say, yeah, and we wish we could play the piano like you do. And you suddenly go, oh, okay, that's my natural gift, and that's something I have to learn. And they would go, this is my natural gift, and the piano would be something I have to learn. And so when I talk to musicians, we all talk about music and how we built sound, how the song, how did that happen? But when I talk to artists, I have that sort of awe sort of feeling of talking to an artist. How did you do this? How did you get that inspiration? How did you get that idea? So I've always been very lucky to get to know the artists that have done my album covers. Rodney Matthews, who I mentioned, lives just up the road from me. We see each other all the time. Roger Dean, when we were doing the Yes cover, we had so many conversations about the Yes album sleeves and where the ideas came from the covers. Anne Sudworth, that I work with, is a wonderful artist. She did the cover of Three Ages. Peter Brokaunick's another well-known artist in the UK from down in Cornwall, did the Dark Fables cover. And you sit and talk to these people for hours. And I really enjoy that engagement rather than the music, because I talk to musicians all the time. But when I talk to the artists, I really get something from it. I'm talking to Roger about the From a Page cover. If you've seen the From a Page cover, it's the boat in front of the rock. And that is from, when we talked about that, he said to me, I've got this idea for the cover, which I'd like to give you for the cover of that. And I said, that's amazing. And he said, what do you like about it? I said, I love the fact it's so open compared to a lot of the Yes covers, which are so intense and dense with stuff. And he said, it's actually, if you look at Closer to the Edge 3, the painting that he did years later, he said it's one of the tiny rocks right in the middle. If you look really closely, there's a rock with a boat in it. He said, and I really like the idea that this record was all the way from Close to the Edge right into something in the modern day. And so that was his idea for that.
That's amazing. Wow.
That's great. And then I said, because when we were doing it, I said, do you know what? I'd really like some figures. It's a shame you didn't paint any figures, because on Live from Leon cover, there was a bridge, and he did 5 people on this bridge in groups of 3 and a group of 2. And I remember saying to him, I really like what you did there with the figures. That's Chris Stephen Allen, isn't it? And that's me and Benoit joining the band. And he went, I hadn't thought of that. He said, I just put them in there.
My God.
And so when we got to do the back cover, when I said about these people for the From a Page cover, he said to me, I said, oh, shame you can't. He said, oh, yeah. He said, I can't do that. He said, because the painting's all finished and scanned and stuff. He went, how about I paint you something else? And I was like, yeah, here I'm talking to Roger Dean, and he's going to paint me a bespoke Yes cover for my own, this record. And he said, and I'll put the characters in there. And then he did it on the back cover, and there are the characters there. And I thought it was amazing because he did the 2 characters again and the 3 and then 2 again. And I said, that's amazing. I said, what were you thinking? He said, well, I wasn't, just wanted to draw the characters that you said. And then I can look at it and it looks like me and Benoit leaving and Trevor and Jeff coming to join. And I love that tie-in between the 2 album sleeves. And that's what I love about artists, is that they can, their imagination just takes it to another level on top of the music. Yeah. So that's why, I mean, I love talking to musicians and anybody that, you know, has a talent. I love to talk to anybody. I'll talk to anybody and bore the pants off anybody if I can. But talking to an artist that can do something I can't do and interpret something in the way I can't do it is something that I really, really engage with.
Yeah. It's a special part of the brain too. It's a special, just the way the brain functions in that way, that ultimate creative dynamic, whether it's visual arts or audio arts, it's just, it's otherworldly, you know, at times. Yeah. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry if there's noise in the background. My little daughter's trying to get ready for bed. She's calling my name.
You're fine. Well, we could talk to you for hours and hours. We're so grateful for the time that you've given us here. Thank you so much.
No, it's absolute pleasure. I mean, when the next one comes out, call me again and we'll carry on where we left off.
You got it. Absolutely. Oliver Wakeman, thank you so much for your time, sir.
It's absolute pleasure. Thanks for calling.
Yeah.